Welcome to all of you. It's a stellar evening in many ways. Not only is it the new record setter for fundraising in the history of the Academy, 31-year history, it's a stellar audience and two phenomenal honorees. But we do have in the audience previous recipients of the Bob Ball Award, which is a really special award. I'd like to ask them to stand. Alicia Manel, Steve Goss, Bob Reischauer, Marilyn Moon. Would you just stand so we can just thank all of you also? John Rother will be stopping by later. He was also a recipient. I trust I left no one else out who might be here. We really owe a debt of gratitude to all of you for your contributions to the field of social insurance. Tonight's a very special night, and I don't want to delay the remarks to be made on behalf of our recipients. Just a couple of things. When we announced the award, and the first time we're giving two awards out, people were curious that both honorees bear the same last name. And we had to assure people that there was no nepotism, there's no collusion. But it's ironic that right after we announced it, I get a phone call from J Altman. And he said, "I'd like to be on the event committee." I said, "This is terrific." And then we get a contribution from Bill Altman, and I was very, very grateful. And I'm thinking, what's next? And Dave Kautter, who will be speaking, his assistant sends us an email, and what do you think her name is? Tracy Altman. So I'm starting to wonder. But we are thrilled again to be able to do this. We want to not delay, so I'm going to ask people who are going to be speaking on behalf of Nancy Altman to please come up. Senator Bernie Sanders, Dave Kautter, Eric Kingson, Jonathan Ball. We may have someone else joining us to add comments that someone else sent in who couldn't be here. But let me start with Senator Sanders, who will be the lead speaker on behalf of Nancy Altman. Senator?
To all of the Altmans, here and everywhere, Bill, thank you very much for inviting me, and let me thank the National Academy of Social Insurance for allowing me to say a few words for a very, very good friend and someone who has played a very important role in protecting the lives of many millions of our fellow Americans. So it is my pleasure to be with you tonight to introduce Nancy J. Altman, this year's co-recipient of the Robert M. Ball Award for Outstanding Achievements in Social Insurance. And I know that I don't have to tell anybody in this room that Nancy is one of the leading experts in this country on Social Security, with 40 years of experience on retirement security issues. She is the president of Social Security Works and the Strengthen Social Security Coalition, a national grassroots movement representing millions of seniors, workers, people with disabilities, women, veterans, and civil rights advocates. She is the author of The Battle for Social Security, From FDR's Vision to Bush's Gamble. From 1983 to 89, Nancy was on the faculty of Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government and taught courses on private pensions and Social Security at the Harvard Law School. Year after year, I have had the honor and the privilege of working side by side with Nancy to prevent Congress from cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, to make sure that everyone in this country has the ability to retire with dignity and respect, to lower the outrageously high cost of prescription drugs, to guarantee health care to every man, woman, and child in this country as a right and not a privilege, and to make sure that the wealthiest people in our country begin to pay their fair share of taxes. Nancy understands that at a time when half, not a lot of people know this, but half of older Americans have no retirement savings, when 1 out of 5 seniors are trying to survive on less than $13,000 a year. And I keep repeating that statistic whenever I speak in Vermont or anyplace else, and it's just unbelievable to me that anyone can survive on less than $13,000 a year. when the average Social Security benefit is less than $1,300 a month, when more than a third of seniors depend on Social Security for virtually all of their income, our job clearly is not to cut Social Security, but to expand Social Security. Nancy understands that despite what Paul Ryan, Mitch McConnell, and those in the media tell us every day, Social Security is not going broke. Senior citizens who are trying to get by on $13,000 a year are going broke, but Social Security is not. As all of you know, Social Security today has a $2.9 trillion surplus and can pay out every benefit owed to every eligible American for the next 16 years. I am proud to have worked with Nancy on legislation that I introduced last year to expand Social Security and to extend its solvency for the next 60 years, not 16 years, but 60 years, by requiring the wealthiest Americans, those who make over $250,000 a year, to pay their fair share of Social Security taxes. Under this legislation, 98.4% of Americans would not see their taxes go up by 1 penny. Under this bill, Social Security benefits would increase by about $1,300 a year for low-income seniors and increase COLA adjustments by more accurately measuring the spending patterns of seniors. Nancy understands that it is absurd for a CEO making $20 million a year to pay the same amount of money into Social Security as someone who makes $128,000 a year. And working together, we will change that. At a time of massive income and wealth inequality, it is time to lift the cap. Nancy also understands that while Social Security is the most successful government program in the history of our country, it can't work for Americans if it doesn't have adequate staff to answer the phones, meet with applicants, and process claims. Last year, and I know that all of you are familiar with these statistics, but last year, Washington Post did an article. It kind of blew me away. And the article said that 10,000 people died waiting for their Social Security disability claims to be processed because of a grossly underfunded and understaffed Social Security Administration. Can you imagine that? 10,000 people died waiting for their Social Security disability benefits to be processed. As the ranking member of the Budget Committee, we work with Nancy and many of you to try to improve that situation, to try to get a little bit more money into the Social Security Administration. And in the last budget, I'm happy to tell you that we increased funding for the first time in many, many years for the Social Security Administration by $480 million. While this was a good step forward, Nancy knows, and I know, and all of you know, that we can and must do better than that. And that is why I have introduced legislation. I will introduce it tomorrow to substantially increase funding for the Social Security Administration. In the richest country in the history of the world, people with disabilities should not have to wait over 2 years to get the benefits that they are entitled to. So let me just conclude by, on a personal note, thanking Nancy for doing some of the most important work in this country, for helping to protect some of the most vulnerable people in our country. Nancy, it has been an honor and a pleasure to work with you, and I congratulate you on your award tonight. Thank you all very much.
Let me now introduce Dave Kautter. Dave's the Assistant Treasury Secretary for Tax Policy and the Acting Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. Dave?
Thanks, Bill. Many years ago, Nancy and I worked together on Capitol Hill for Senator Jack Danforth from Missouri. Senator Danforth regrets that he cannot be here tonight, but he has asked me to read a statement on his behalf. No one is more deserving of the Robert M. Ball Award than Nancy Altman. For decades, she has devoted her considerable talents to the cause of social insurance, and she has been a leading expert in the field. As a young lawyer, Nancy joined my Senate staff as a legislative assistant. I highly valued her keen intellect and relied on her judgment and advice. Beyond her ability, I admire Nancy's decency and character, her kindness, and her devotion to doing good works. I join her many friends in congratulating Nancy Altman on receiving this prestigious award tonight. Congratulations, Nancy. Thank you. I'd also like to say a few words on my own behalf. I met Nancy 40 years ago this past January when we both worked for Senator Jack Danforth, as I mentioned, and we've been friends ever since. We shared an office during our days on Senator Danforth's staff, and many of my fondest memories are of my days sharing that office with Nancy. It was easy to see, even many years ago, that Nancy would make a difference in the lives of others and in the world, and she has certainly done that. Her passion for those things she cared about was evident in the energy and intellectual effort she put forth. Her commitment to a strong, sound social insurance system for the country has never wavered, nor has the energy she has put into it. Nancy is one of the most collaborative, collegial individuals I have ever met, not to mention one of the nicest and most sincere. She is an author, a scholar, an extraordinary thinker, and a genuinely decent, reflective, caring human being. I've admired Nancy and her accomplishments for 4 decades, and I cannot think of a more deserving individual to receive this esteemed award. Congratulations, Nancy.
Now I'd like to ask Eric Kingson, who co-founded Social Security Works with Nancy. He goes back many years. She and I and Eric were on the founding board of the National Academy of Social Insurance, so always good to welcome you back, Eric.
Thank you, Bill. We were the young people on the founding board. We really were. We were the 3 young ones. And we still were. So I'm very pleased to be here. It's a pleasure to honor Nancy Altman and also to honor Stuart Altman. And to be here with wonderful company. I'm going to say a lot about Nancy, or a little about Nancy, but I have to start by saying something about Stuart Altman, who was dean of the Heller School when I received my degree there, and who we know is a national treasure in terms of health policy. What we may not know is he's a very generous, giving person who was caring and giving to his colleagues and to students. He's also an outstanding teacher, so I have to add that. If Bill hadn't explained that they're not married, I was going to double check that, but that's taken care of. So I can think of no one more fitting than Nancy to receive this award. Of course, there's some folks who may be as fitting, such as Stuart or some of the folks here, but I also can think of no one who Bob would be more pleased about receiving this award at this time in history. Bob had the ability, Bob had some characteristics Nancy shares. He had the ability to work effectively with people whose views differed from his own without being disagreeable, as they say, or burning bridges, or compromising his core values, or cutting his goals that he had to get things done. I met Nancy 36 years ago, not as long as you did, when she was the staff person to Alan Greenspan and to the National Commission on Social Security Reform, and a lot of us were involved. There's Virginia, there's Steve was involved. There are a number of people here, so I'm going to forget. And they were not contentious, but at times we had a contentious staff. And the one person on the staff who really rose above it was Nancy, but also the person who received respect universally across political party. She did an extraordinary job, and she continues that. I've had the chance to work with Nancy for the last 8, 9, 10 years, and she remains that way. She's very capable and also, as was just said, extraordinarily collegial and effective. Bob was an amazing teacher. He was patient. He was concerned with educating the media. He was concerned with educating staff, with educating the general public. He could answer questions, even though he was tired of hearing them. He could answer questions without putting others at ill ease who knew a little less than he did. In her books, Nancy's put forward many of these things in her blog, in her many media interviews now, and in public presentations. She's carrying forward that tradition. And she's always willing to explain complex issues in ways that are understandable to mere human beings. Bob understood the importance of grooming new generations. He also understood that we stand on the shoulders of those who come before us. He was pleased, as we'll hear from Jonathan Ball, his vision of the National Academy involved that, creating a vehicle for advancing and maintaining the traditions of social insurance. Working with Nancy on Social Security Works, probably the most fun she has is seeing new people come into the field, seeing folks like Alex. Ben isn't that new, but Ben, people like, well, Linda, Stephanie, we'll go forward. Alex, of course, the other Alex, but she sees her greatest contribution of engaging new people in the field, and that's very similar to Bob. Bob also combined advancement of social insurance ideas as critical to his work and also the values that inform social insurance. Nancy, too, is driven by values, the idea that we all have some obligation to care for others, to care for ourselves, and to care for neighbors and family. The idea that if you work hard, you ought to get something back. These values drove Bob. They also drive Nancy. I'll end just by saying she's an extraordinarily talented advocate. She's committed. She has a steel commitment. I was going to say Bob was a strong gentleman. Nancy is a strong, gentle woman. There's steel there. She will not let go. She'll be polite. She's gotten a lot done in her years and a lot of respect from people that's well due. It's so wonderful to see you get this, Nancy. And I guess I would add one thing. Bob Ball was rarely wrong about anything, right? Now, Bob didn't believe that there's an afterlife, but if he was wrong, I know he's smiling right now.
We are especially honored for the first time in the 31-year history of the Academy to have Bob's son, Jonathan Ball, join us. John?
I am honored to be here. Thank you for inviting me. It does seem like my father should be here and that he would be so delighted on this occasion. But I'll offer some thoughts about my father and Nancy. There was a time when a visit to my parents in their later years meant having the day begin with hearing my father on the phone, summarizing the ideas that occurred to him during the night. Some of you may have experienced that. Then after breakfast, he'd be making a call with a new thought. Then throughout the day, before and after his nap, and until bedtime, there would be more such calls. My wife reminded me that often the calls began not with a, "Hello, this is Bob Ball," with instead, I have another thought about that last page. It became evident to us that it was the same person on the receiving end of all these calls. I'm not sure what it was like to be in her shoes. This was Nancy Altman in the process of writing her 2005 book, The Battle for Social Security. And this was my father being inspired and energized by her efforts. Thinking about this Robert M. Ball Award made me reflect on what he would want to be his legacy. For the most part, he was too busy in the present promoting the institutional legacy of Social Security to give much thought to his own personal legacy. However, there were two time periods I can pick out when he was specifically concerned with how the role he had been playing might be sustained when he was gone. The first occurred a little over 30 years ago. He worried about the lack of national visibility and the lack of opportunities for collegiality for people who shared an interest in the cause of social insurance. This concern was largely satisfied by launching a new institution that would become an enduring professional network, the National Academy of Social Insurance. Later in his life, he expressed several urgent areas of concern about what his absence would mean. One concern was that without his input, people would get parts of the history of Social Security wrong. This included his worry that the story of the 1983 Greenspan Commission would be misrepresented to serve the agenda of program opponents. This concern was largely alleviated by his frequent collaborator, Tom Bethel's, undertaking the task of presenting the true inside story. Another concern was that more needed to be done to encourage and recognize contributions to the field of social insurance. The Academy's creation of this award in his name was a particularly apt response to this concern. He would be honored to see the list of distinguished awardees associated with his name, who have come from diverse fields and served in diverse roles. Last year's awards recognizing the Academy's founding board members, including Nancy Altman, would be particularly gratifying to him. A final concern that my father had was that there might not be anyone else positioned quite the way he was, serving as an independently based advocate with a single-minded focus on the cause of Social Security. Really, how could anyone match what he had been doing so intensely for so long? He needed to face that reality. At the same time, the good news was that the level of concern that he felt in this regard diminished appreciably the more he interacted with Nancy Altman. He came to trust her as a voice from the next generation whose understanding and passion for the cause was in sync with his. And like him, she was choosing to position herself to serve as a relentless advocate. In an aside in his notes for a memoir, he mentions that she would make an excellent choice for Social Security Commissioner. I believe he would not be surprised that she has gone on to flourish as a spokesperson for the cause. He would be pleased to learn of her work with Eric Kingson, founding the Social Works organization and writing the book by that name, Social Security Works, and now with her new book, The Truth About Social Security. He would have been heartened to see that her leadership has helped generate positive political momentum, and importantly, as Eric explained, has attracted leaders from a younger generation to the cause. All this being said, and thinking of my father's legacy, nothing could be more fitting than to have this organization, with this award, honor this awardee. Congratulations, Nancy.
Later on in tonight's program, we will have some additional remarks made about Nancy, but we want to stick to a very rigorous time schedule. But I thought it would be most appropriate, following John, is to read what Bob Ball himself wrote about Nancy. in his book about the Greenspan Commission. And he wrote this right after Nancy's first book, The Battle for Social Security, had come out prior to his passing. And Bob wrote, "I was the commissioner of Social Security under 3 presidents, Presidents Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon. I began working on Social Security on January 1st, 1939, and I have read just about every book written on the subject. The Battle for Social Security is the best Social Security book to come out in a long time, and indeed is among the best ever written on the subject."